here we go. First up, just want to let you know that we are recording this session. It is already being recorded. If you signed up on the Mobilize event, you are going to get the recording tomorrow. So don't you worry, you are going to get this not once, but twice or however many times you want to watch it. The second piece, since this is a Q&A with an author, we are going to use the Q&A function on Zoom. So the way that that works is you can ask a question, you type it in, and then once you open the Q&A box, you can also thumbs up questions that you want us to ask or answer first. So make sure when you go to the Q&A box, you're asking your question, look to see if someone else has already asked it. And if they have, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. We can sort by the ones that people have asked the most. So we're answering the most relevant questions first. Before we move on, if you cannot see the Q&A box, you might need to click on the three little dots that say more at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It's next to the red button. Don't hit the red one, hit the three dots that say more and find that Q&A function, open it up, and you'll be good to go. All right, couple of norms. So this is at an Arena event. We are extremely interactive and community focused at Arena. We ask that as you're interacting in the chat with each other, with our panelists today, that you are respecting, empowering, and including everyone. Also participate, engage in the chat, react, drop questions in the Q&A. We're so excited to be here with you and hope that we can make the most of our time together, not just to hear from our participants, but also to be in community with each other. That being said, please make space and take space. Be mindful of how you participate, including in the chat. Don't worry too much. If the chat is moving quickly, that is okay. That's why the Q&A box is there, to make sure we don't miss any questions. And finally, use video as you can. That's what makes an arena event an arena event. We're excited to see each other, excited to be in community, and it helps us to put faces to names and just, be in each other's company. I think that's it. I think that was my last slide. We are going to get started with our program. So we're going to start with a facilitated conversation. Then we will move into the audience Q&A and we'll have closing remarks. We'll get to do some shout outs and dedications in the chat, and we'll hear from Ben and Ravi, kind of their closing remarks there. All right, that's all from me. I'm excited to welcome to the arena stage, welcome back to the arena stage, Ravi Gupta.
Hey, I'm super excited to be here. I was part of a group of people who started Arena back right after the 2016 election, and it's just really inspiring to see it going strong. Shout out to Santiago, Deborah, and everybody who's keeping this going. It's so important. And Ben, you and I have spoken before. I think we did a documentary a long time ago about Wisconsin. Crazy to think about. So excited, huge fan of Ben. Ben is a remarkable guy because we're so divided as a party, and yet everybody likes Ben. So it's hopefully that's a sign for where he's heading moving forward. So let's start with sort of the biggest, like easiest slash hardest question for you, Ben, which is you've run one of the, by most people's accounts, one of the best state parties in the country. It seems like nobody's happy about the direction of national leadership in the party. If you could rebuild the party from scratch today, what are sort of the three most important things you'd change?
So, Robbie, first of all, thank you for all your work with Arena and the things we've collaborated on, and all the folks here, everyone running for office and working on campaigns or going to work on campaigns in the future. And all of Arena is something I've always just been a huge fan of. And I will also say, Arena and the Democratic Party of Wisconsin worked together on a massive volunteer training operation during the Democratic
That's
National
right.
Virtual Convention in
That's
2020.
right.
So this is a
Forgot about that.
fun
It's
reunion with
crazy.
me.
Yes.
We trained thousands of people at that moment. So that was, and I think the approach of just building a ton of skills for a ton of people to do really good work is a really, really good strategy. So thanks to you, and thanks to everyone here, and thanks for the partnership with my book, which I'm very excited about. Um, Secondly, I have a chapter in the book about the Democratic Party, and the chapter's title is "It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want to." And that I start by noting that, just about everyone has their beefs with the Democratic Party of one stripe or another, often from very different directions, sometimes referring to different kinds of entities. Um, but the thing that the party has uniquely, the Democratic Party, is that it has a presence everywhere, which means that it can become a vehicle for supporting great candidates and doing great local organizing that can benefit every candidate everywhere. It's the only entity in the our sort of side um, of the American political divide that exists in every zip code in some way or another. And that means that if you're trying to figure out, a way to have the biggest impact you can on a bazillion different races, the Democratic Party has a very special quality. It also has legal powers that other entities don't. And I think um, my biggest kind of idea for the future of the party is to draw inspiration from what the party was like a century ago, which is a mass membership participatory organization where huge numbers of people made it part of their lives to be involved in the party and then to get involved in work to elect candidates at every level of government. And that to me is a lot about what we've built over years in Wisconsin, starting with the chairs before me. And, I helped carry that forward. And now the current chair is doing the same thing. Wisconsin just in every kind of ranking of states and state parties for, mobilize events per capita in the state, for ballots cured through the voter protection hotline, all the things that volunteers can do, Wisconsin is always at the top of the leaderboards. And the reason for that is that we've built a kind of neighbor to neighbor organizing program that allows people to get involved wherever they are in whatever thing is going to connect with them in the biggest way. And I would love every state party, the national party, for the whole party to build an orientation around empowering the grassroots to get involved in supporting this work. And then working on races at every level, including for all the campaigns that folks here are part of. I think the second thing that has been a hallmark of the approach we've had in Wisconsin that I think the party at its best at every level can do is relentlessly focus on how to use every dollar in the most efficient possible way. And that reflects the kind of realization that candidate campaigns can do some things in the most efficient way. The party can do some things in the most efficient way. Independent and allied groups have either advantages like as messengers to some voters, or digital ads cost exactly the same for the party, the candidate, and an outside group. So if the ad can be bought by an outside group that can raise money from unions in a way that the party has a hard cap, things like that, then an outside group can do it. And I think everybody figuring out what they can do most efficiently and building trust with each other so that everyone does all the things that are most efficient helps create confidence for people that they're not just getting spammed with emails or text messages, about the sky falling, but actually that there's a game plan that allows them to use those dollars in the most effective way. So one, organize everywhere. Two, stretch every dollar. And then number three is having a long-term plan that, in my view, has to be a plan in each state that stretches out over a decade. This is something that, I don't think this is a disagreement with the current national leadership. I learned this idea from Ken Martin, who's the DNC national chair, who built a 10-year plan when he was first elected in his state. But both have a plan and communicate it so everyone can see what they're doing is part of a bigger plan and adds up to a bigger picture. And what I've seen is that even when people, if you're spending a long time walking between doors and nobody's home, it can feel like, why am I even doing this? But if you can see how it connects to a much bigger vision, or for people that are running for local office, for city council in a place where the city council approves um, the election administration budget, like those things matter enormously to the big fight to like make this a country that works for everyone and make democracy actually work. And constantly communicating that plan, going back to that plan, connecting people's individual actions to it so they can see how they're part of the bigger picture helps to give us all a sense that we're in this together, which to me is the heart of the Democratic Party's message at our best. We're a party that believes that, if we join together, we can make things better and that you're not on your own. So those are my three big ideas for the Democratic Party, and I dig into more detail on what they all mean in the book. But it's all stuff that the folks on this call have lived out in practice. So I'm one reason I'm honored to be with everyone today.
Well, you write about in the book this idea of a permanent campaign. What does that look like, and how do you execute that in a world where people have their day jobs and just generally like can get exhausted by, 24/7, 365 politics?
So this is very real. And I think, to own a phone is to be hammered with notifications that make it feel like the world is falling that you want to escape from. And I think, full-time political professionals experience that at least as much as folks for whom this is not a job. To own a phone is to be notified. Exactly. I think that the critical thing is finding a group of people that you enjoy doing this with. They can be your peers. They can be people that, we worked with on a particular campaign that are staying in touch. They can be your neighborhood team, your county party, your kitchen cabinet, whatever it is. And then to find a role for yourself that you enjoy doing and you can make a habit, a part of your life. It doesn't work if it constantly feels like you are, forcing yourself to eat a vegetable that you hate. Like this only works if it becomes something that you can actually enjoy. And the good thing is that in politics, there's so many different types of roles that you can have that, I think for anyone who feels motivated to try to make a difference, you could be someone who's talking to voters at their door. You could be somebody who's entering data. You could be somebody who's, doing strategy or amplifying stuff digitally, or, like find the thing that floats your boat. My like what we need is for a few million more people to make political involvement something that is a regular habit, whether it's professionally or on a volunteer basis, over years. And if we find that, then I actually think there's an enormous like avenue for us to go from this moment of crisis and disaster to the best democracy we've ever had as a country. But that's not going to work if it's people doing it because they feel like they resent and hate every second of what they're doing. This has to be fun. I quote The Princess Bride in my book. I think a key piece of advice in that movie is have fun storming the castle. It's Miracle Max talking to the heroes. And if you want to storm the castle in a civil, non-January 60 kind of way, my advice is to find a way that you can actually have fun doing it.
Well, I think one of the hardest questions for a state party or a national party, especially, and I'm using the term loosely, like there are tons of different committees that have different roles here, is whether to intervene and direct money and support to candidates pre-primary. As in a sense, pick winners and losers, right? There are some entities who exist for that very purpose, whether they're party committees or organizations like Run for Something. At Arena, we early on did this. We, ironically, within our community, just thinking of Michigan, Haley Stevens and Mallory McMorrow were both fellows, and
Oh,
Abdul Syed was a very active member of the community who I've interviewed on stage multiple times. So they were all members of our community. We moved off of that sort of fellowship model for many reasons, but one of them was that we felt like our role was to be as big tent as possible and simply provide a like the resource for anybody. At that time, it was the Bernie people versus Hillary people. So we were like, okay, you could be a Bernie person and we're gonna train your campaign manager. You could be a Hillary person, we're gonna train your campaign manager. There's certain races where we were training multiple managers and comms directors in the same primaries. I imagine you get a lot of questions, and there's one here in this chat from Maxfield about what you think of Francesca Hong, and do you think she has a chance, referring to the race next week in your home state. Like, what's your role here? Like, you plus a party, like
yeah.
intervening pre-primary.
So Wisconsin, the Democratic Party of Wisconsin has a constitution that dates back to 1949. The party had a previous incarnation, but when Joe McCarthy was elected to the U.S. Senate, the party decided it had to become this kind of big tent coalition that could fight the Joe McCarthys of the world, and drew people from the Republican Party of the day, the kind of liberal wing, the Progressive Party, which was a force in Wisconsin politics until shortly before then, and the Democratic Party. And it wrote in its constitution, drawing on the tradition of the progressive movement, that the party would not endorse in primaries. So that's true of the National Democratic Committee. It's true of our state party. It's not true of every state party. But I think there's a huge value to being a place that convenes everyone after the election's over, and to building infrastructure that is not used to help one candidate or another in an open primary, but rather to lift all boats. And it means that every candidate agrees to put in and to work with the party in a coordinated campaign, because they know that it's not going to then turn against them in the next contested primary. I think that that's a really powerful model. I also think it is totally like part of democracy and natural appropriate for lots of other groups to take positions in primaries. Individuals and groups and elected officials doing that is just part of everyone having their say in how the democracy works. That said, like, well, we see right now there are a lot of different outside groups that spend enormous amounts of money in primaries. In Wisconsin, we've seen a Republican Governors Association multi-million-dollar ad campaign in the primary. And I think in a world of citizens united and the world that Republican you know lawyers and judges have dreamed up, right now we're in this area where there's going to be lots of people acting in those fights, including on the right. And I think that the long-term solution to this probably involves like term limits for the U.S. Supreme Court. And there's ideas around constitutional amendments, amending state constitutions, corporate charters. There's like a bunch of things to do to get to a world where voters have the loudest voice in the room. And I would love to move to that world. Um, so, my sort of overall view is that there's a huge value to having parties that are neutral infrastructure. I think for each organization like Arena, like there's a question of what role you want to play in the ecosystem, and there's I think a value to having kind of non-factional things that build infrastructure for everybody, and then there's also like part of the contest of democracy is having battles of ideas and organizing coalitions, and that's just part of the glorious mess of how a democratic process works.
One of the sort of central conclusions that has seemed to be widely shared coming out of the last presidential election was that the party was over-indexing on highly educated, more high-income voters, and underperforming with rural voters, low-income voters, and certain communities of color, Black and Latino voters in particular, where we lost some major support. As I was looking at the returns last night, and this has been true of some of the primaries, some of our like candidates who are emerging in our primaries statewide campaigns are winning the coalitions we were over-indexing on before and losing the coalitions that we've been struggling with. What's the answer here? Have we done anything meaningful at this point at halftime to rectify some of these problems the party had last time around?
So I think the biggest shift from 2024 to now that is a very welcome and important shift is there's broadly speaking a consensus that the biggest crisis that most Americans, especially people who might or might not vote or people who might switch who they're going to vote for, are struggling with is the cost of living. It's affordability. And that there's an economic thread that runs through every group that you just mentioned, and that runs through the American electorate in general. And there's a level of fury and outrage about a system that is clearly working great for the Elon Musks of the world and it's not working well for regular people. And that is the most powerful message at this moment across all the races that I see, across every test, across doors that you might knock, like people's fury at how expensive everything is, um, and how the system itself seems to be kind of corrupt and benefiting those at the top instead of them. That seems like the right through line, and you see the same argument across the factional divide within the Democratic Party. That is, there was not a consensus that was the central message in 2024. And I write in the book about how, if you look around the world, that was actually the biggest topic of fury for every electorate in the world and led to every incumbent party in the world losing ground in an advanced democracy in 2024. The first time that had ever happened. The biggest issue everywhere was how much prices had jacked up. And right now, the Iran war is making that even worse. It's making gas cost more. It's making groceries cost more. So I do think that a kind of message and communication shift in this way is really powerful. Now, there's obviously a lot more than just that kind of top line message. There's both how you deliver it, but also who the candidates and messengers are. And there are lots of big debates raging about lots of different things. I don't think that's the only thing that tipped 2024. The election was so close that any number of issues could have had that effect, but it was by far the biggest thing across like a huge range of different ways to try to understand what happened. And I do think that has come home for Democrats, and it has not come home for the GOP in a fascinating way. So Trump, I was in Wisconsin during 2024. Trump was campaigning on, I'm going to bring down prices on day one. That was the thing that registered the most with voters. And that was his priority and focus. For all the other, anti-trans ads and all the other attacks he did, the biggest shift was from voters who said the top issue was prices, who, got the sense that Trump was going to be best on prices. Now he's totally ignored that and is acting like he had a mandate for everything else. And he's actively making fun of people who are concerned about the cost of living. And he's, jerking the country over a right-wing cliff in every other respect. So he's basically already lost the people who move towards him. They're already ready to vote for change in a different direction. And I think the Democrats have more to do to demonstrate that they're actually going to deliver that change. I think that's something that state governments can do a huge amount on. And there's, appropriately a big kind of conversation about what kinds of policies will do it. But I do think that fundamental tuning into where voters are and meeting them there and communicating to them about the issue that's central for them is something that I've seen a huge range of different Democrats taking to heart and ready to do.
There's this tension, I think, out there between different narratives about the quote unquote party. And when I talk to people who aren't that involved in politics, and even some people who are very involved, they talk about the quote unquote party as if it should be all things, right? And I think they also conflate the DNC, the DCCC, the DSCC, state parties, and you know any number of communications and media organizations, and they lump them into sort of one conglomerate and give it superpowers and complain about why it doesn't do this or it doesn't do that. How do you right size people's expectations about what the quote unquote the party is while also being ambitious about what it can do?
Yeah. So I read in the book about how when people talk about the party, usually what people talk about is the amorphous blob of the everything, every
Right.
elected official, every consultant, every organization, all the pundits, the people who post angrily online, like all those things. Um, there's no one boss of that whole operation unless you have a president who's kind of like running the show, like Trump, who's clearly the head of the amorphous blob on the GOP side. Um, and even he doesn't control everything. Um, Especially when you're out of power, like it is amorphous, and there are, for any given thing that one person might be mad about the party doing, there are a whole bunch of people inside the blob who are pushing in the other direction. Um, I I think the strategy that I've taken here of writing a book where I talk about this and then doing interviews about it is one thing that we can try to do. I think the biggest thing that actually changes people's perception of the role of the party is to get involved or touched by the party in some way directly, because you realize that it is much more like um, an old school like civic club, like the Order of the Elks, where people get together once a month and meet each other. That is ideally attached to a kind of permanent campaign that's organizing and giving people things to do. But all the people who show up for Democratic Party meetings, they cannot tell candidates to run or not to run and have the candidates listen. They can't tell candidates what message to have and have them listen. They don't get to decide the ads. The party itself doesn't have control over so many things that people blame the party for. The formal organizations of the party, at best, are like a home for people to get together and figure out how to do things. And often the impact of the formal party is greatest on local races because you have local county party meetings where people are like, who's going to run for county board? Let's brainstorm names, and they get together and do that. But you can also do that outside the party. Like that doesn't even have to be most of that activity happens outside of formal party settings. So in a way, like I think you're exactly right. You have to shrink down people's sense of what the formal party actually does to something that's closer to reality, and at the same time expand the ambition level for like how much can a party give people to do. I see huge growth in party organizations that give people a meaningful role and feed back to them the effect of their activities. And when I look at county parties across the country, the ones that have this kind of organizing mindset of like everyone's got something to do, everyone's got something to add, we want everybody to get involved, and we're gonna like put you to work. Like those tend to be the party organizations that thrive because people have a meaningful experience there and participate in building power for change. The ones that spend all their time arguing about resolutions, bless the people that have the patience and energy for that. But like, you know, that's not going to win elections. Like the thing that wins elections is actually meeting voters who are on the fence about whether it's worth voting for a Democrat, either non-voters or swing voters. Both of them are persuasion jobs where you need to have a human being who ideally is trusted by the voter actually communicating with them. And that's something that parties can totally organize people to do in really large scale. And that's, to me, that's the promise of where we could go at a grassroots level and as a kind of coalition, is building that kind of permanent campaign mindset and energy across the country.
Yeah, it's almost like the party should do less so they could do more. It's like pick a few important roles to play and then just be really awesome at that, and let others take care of other aspects of this. Well, I think it's a good time to transition to Q&A. So I'll go in order here. This is from Gina Maria. I'm from Wisconsin and have experienced your method of organizing and was there to help you get elected in 2018 in MKE, Milwaukee, I would imagine,
Thank you.
right? Do you believe it works in each and every state?
So I think that a method in each and every state, there's some method of organizing that's going to work. I think the thing I advocate the most for in the book, and that I am most blown away by the impact of in Wisconsin and every place I've seen it, is relational organizing, where people are talking to people that they actually know. And the hardest thing is to scale relational organizing. But I quote Abraham Lincoln in the book. In 1841, he wrote a letter to the Whig Party Committee, and he said, um, keep a constant watch on the most doubtful voters, and from time to time have them talked to by those in whom they have the most confidence, which is like figure out who's actually on the fence, figure out who they trust, and then organize those folks to check in with them. That is the best, still the best political advice. And now we have apps that help us do it, and voter files and data and all this kind of stuff. But building that was memorized. Building the biggest kind of operation to ensure that people are actually reaching out to folks that they can have an impact on, um, is the is kind of the essence of what politics actually is. It's about people persuading each other to find common cause and take action together. That's something that it might be that in some places like there's an older voting population or a much younger one. That some places a lot more people are in college and campus organizing is great. A lot of or if you're in a community where everyone's in the workforce, then having people talk to each other in the on the factory floor might be the most powerful thing. Some states have much stronger unions, and some places the unions have been stomped to smithereens. So what this looks like is going to be different everywhere, but the common currency is people and trust. So if when people talk to someone who actually listens to them, that can have an impact on them, and it takes a whole bunch of people organizing together to be able to reach the scale where you can actually reach a ton of different voters. And I think that's my through line, and I think that's why for any particular group of people that wants to have an impact, like you got to map out what relationships everyone has, what kind of capacity and time everyone has, and you know who the voters are, who if you're able to move them could actually make a difference in everything.
And I just realized I can rank these by upvotes. So people listening, you can vote on which questions you want to hear an answer to. So the current winner here so far is Kate Bixler with the most votes here. This is what she wrote. She said, in light of the need to create a grassroots permanent campaign, do you think state parties should professionalize certain county party roles or have staff that helps with county party work in a way that doesn't go away when executive committees turn over? I've been involved with two county parties now with great state party leadership support, but the expectations of what we have to achieve or how we have to support candidates really matches the consistency of resources. And while you answer, I'm going to mute myself quickly because I'm going on Midas right after this, and I have to clarify something about a video they're about to play. So
Great.
I'll give them that message while you answer.
That sounds good. So I think there's different places where staff can live. I've seen county parties that have full-time year-round staff that it is fantastic. There's also lots of small rural counties where having one staffer who spans a bunch of different counties makes more sense. In Wisconsin, we kind of have a hybrid model. We have regional organizers. We have constituency-focused organizing through our coalitions program. We now also have staffers whose particular focus is building up county party operations, and all those could work. But I think the through line is if you can figure out a way, ideally through recurring donors, to have year-round staff that can actually build relationships and knowledge and support people growing as local leaders over time, that makes the biggest difference. And some of the highest impact work that organizers do is when the election is really far away and they're meeting with potential neighborhood leaders one-to-one in coffee shops or in their living rooms and building teams of people who can then organize volunteers themselves. That's the heart of the neighbor to neighbor model in Wisconsin, and our coalitions operation similar way, like lots of meetings with leaders, coming to events, like building long-term relationships that then when an election happens, especially if you have a contested primary, if the party can introduce the candidates to all the folks in their coalitions and all the teams of organizers that they're going to need, that can really help to strengthen the whoever the general election nominee is. And that's something that parties can bring from year to year to year, so it doesn't decay every single time, which is so often the painful thing. Is like campaigns will do incredible things. They'll connect with so many people, they get all these volunteers engaged, and then campaign ends and it all just turns into ether. Like everyone disbands, and then that's someone who's never met the volunteer is calling them 2 years later and saying, "Hey, we're at it again. Can you come down?" And has no idea that this person lost a loved one or totally burned themselves out or did this incredible thing the last time. And if you can put them back on that project, they'll be able to do it. Like you just lose so much. And there's no business that has this kind of recurring pattern in the world would operate in the kind of total boom bust cycle of the way the American political machinery operates. But it doesn't have to be that way. So if you can figure out how to have the resources to have year-round staff that can bring that expertise and knowledge from year to year, it means that you build a snowball that grows as it rolls downhill. Whether you win or lose every election, you get stronger every time.
Well, this is from Amir. Stretching every dollar and having a 10-year plan seem like solid pieces of strategy. Why hasn't this been already done?
I think a big part of it is that most state chairs are unpaid volunteers. Like only 12 states pay their chairs full time. Very often people come into these roles and they either have a second job or there's some other big thing that takes up most of the time in their life. Most political staff, I think I remember hearing that the average tenure for an executive director of a state party was like 18 months. And so there's a huge amount of turnover for all these different leadership positions. Most of them don't pay that well, and they're not family sustaining. One of the things we were able to do at the Democratic Party of Wisconsin was actually pay for healthcare for staff and their family members. So that made it much more possible if somebody has a family member who needs healthcare to have it be a sustainable job to work at the state party. But the job tenures are so low and the turnover is so high that there's this constant like relearning the basics. I remember being a member of the Association of Democratic State Committee Chairs, ASDC, that Ken Martin used to run. And you go to the meetings of the ASDC chairs, and a huge amount of time goes into like the very 101s for all the new chairs who show up, and then how to go through the process of sending a delegation to the national convention, which definitely something that state parties do and really important, but it can't be the only thing they do. Like if that's where most of the time and attention goes, then the party's not really involved in winning the elections that are right on a knife's edge. And for state parties that have, I see Texas just joined the list of paying their state chair. Boom, that is so good. 13 states. I'm gonna share that information everywhere I go. Love that. Um, if all you can do when you fundraise is keep your lights on, you do not have that compelling pitch for donors to invest. If you're saying like, hey, our lights are on because we have, recurring monthly donors, and if you invest, then we'll be able to do this, this, and this to help win this election, then you have a much more powerful pitch. And state parties have special powers to contribute to election victories that other organizations legally don't. So there's like, but you can't actually raise the money to do those long-term things, to build the long-term staff until you reach a certain baseline. And I think there's like a chicken and egg challenge. And I think the biggest, the two parts you need are like strong leaders who are able to like do this kind of like long-term thinking, and then also resources to support those folks so they can actually do this job. I'll just close on Anderson Clayton, who I'm a huge fan of, is the chair of the North Carolina Democratic Party. When she was elected, she was working at a call center because she was unpaid and didn't have health insurance through her job. So like for months, she was doing that while also trying to lead the state party in one of the most competitive states in the country. And her central committee then voted to make it a paid position. And I was proud to help fundraise with a bunch of other people. And that all helped to make it possible. And now she raises like, a bazillion times her salary every year as a powerhouse fundraiser. And I hope to see the same thing happen in Texas. I think that's like, it is a wild way to run the party on donated labor. And it is like penny wise, pound foolish to do it that way. So changing the structure so that we're able to raise the funds to raise the roof, I think is the opportunity.
This is from Jeff. How do you create forward momentum in reliably blue districts that aren't particularly compelled to embrace new or evolved thinking to sustain and strengthen democracy? How have you found success compelling incumbents and longstanding leaders to get behind these efforts in areas that aren't battlegrounds? I see this in New York. Very Blue has had, according to Jason Kander, former Secretary of State of Missouri, like some voting restrictions over the years that, would make Mississippi blush.
Yeah.
What can we do?
So I think the biggest thing, something that I'm really enthusiastic about that will take some doing, is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which is a law that can pass through state legislatures that says that if it passes through enough state legislatures, then all the states that pass that law will give their electoral college votes. I have a visitor, Jack. I've got to do my call for.
They decided out. They made us sign in Steam.
Oh, well, Jack, I can't help you with that until 23 minutes from now, but I love you. Video game problems. All right. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is a law that passes through state legislatures to say that if enough state legislatures pass it to add up to states representing the majority in the Electoral College, then all those states who have passed this law will give their Electoral College votes to whoever wins the national popular vote for president, which means that suddenly every vote in the country would count the same for presidential elections, which suddenly means that blue states that are restricting their electorates might realize that could cost cost us the presidency. And I think it creates, there's a risk that red states, they're already suppressing votes. They have even more reason to do that. But it also, I think, creates a real motivation to figure out how to make sure that everybody are going to sign it. States representing 222 electoral college votes have already done it. Basically, every blue trifecta has done it. So we only need 48 more electoral college votes, and we can get those if we win trifectas this year in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Arizona, and New Hampshire. That gets us way over the top. So help us win trifectas in those states, and boom, suddenly every New Yorker will have a very deep, reason to fight for better voting laws in that state. That is one kind of sideways path to doing this. I think strong local party organizations can create this very often. Sometimes you have elected officials who don't want party organizations to be organizing centers because they don't want to create, an alternate power base. But they don't ultimately get to call the shots. Like, this is something that grassroots can make the difference on itself. I think that the sense of having a mission that is greater than just what you're doing in a place where you feel like you've already won politically is really essential. And so sometimes that means adopting other states, adopting swing congressional districts that are nearby, having a focus on flipping county boards or town boards in places where Democrats are not already victorious, having things that draw people in to be involved in fights that can actually move the needle is really essential. And one of the ways that we've done this in races that are not competitive is to run experiments on tactics in those races that can then be ported over to the places that have the more competitive races. Because if you know the outcome in advance, because you're in a very blue or red area, then it's not so scary to hold out a control group and not send postcards to the people in that control group, so you can see what the effective postcards are to the people who are in the treatment group. There's ways that you can build tests like that in places where the stakes are lower, which makes it pretty meaningful to be involved in that work in those places, because it'll change how campaigns are run in the places where things are closest. Creating stakes, I guess, is the bottom line for what I'm saying. People want to get involved when it can actually make a difference on something they care about. And I think if you don't have that, then there's not really a point. But if you do, a lot of people will pour their hearts and souls into it.
I have a follow-up on that, which is, what do you think of open primaries? Because I was thinking about this with increasingly gerrymandered districts, where because you talk about in the book the importance of like all of these like lower level positions and races and how that becomes the bench for future leadership. But if on our state legislative side and House of Representatives side, we have people who are talking to an increasingly gerrymandered group of people, and then have to emerge in the general elections or in future elections, speaking to a wider swath of the electorate, they can run into some issues. Is there some benefit in opening the primary so that independents, you have to speak to independents early, but also that the independents get used to voting for some of these candidates and might be more willing to vote in the general election for people? Something that's been on my mind.
I think there's I have another visit from one of my kiddos. Hello, Susie. Did you look on the side of the house where all the bikes are? They're out. Love you, Susie. All right. There's a bunch of different models for how to do this. Wisconsin was the state that created direct primaries for voters. So I'm really proud of progressive tradition in our state. I find the thing I'm most kind of interested and excited about is top 4 primaries with ranked choice voting. This is something that you got in Alaska. This is systems where everyone can join the primary. It's not based on any particular party. People choose their lower ranked people, so nobody's vote is wasted. And it kind of expands the range of who has a shot in a way that goes towards the electorate. It is a little bit complicated and confusing the first time. So it takes a process to be able to do. But I think it really, like, the fact that Mary Peltola beat Sarah Palin in Alaska speaks to a system where somebody who was closer to the majority of voters, even though majority of voters were voting for Republicans at the presidential election, really worked. And I think there's a real value to that. So I think it's healthy right now that we're having experimentation across the country with different systems. And I think that it could be that there's, New York has fusion voting, other places don't. There's open and closed primaries. There's Wisconsin doesn't even have party registration, so we have very open primaries in that sense. But I find ranked choice voting with the kind of top four primary to be especially compelling because it means that there's positive stakes for everybody, and it also means that there's an incentive for candidates to build kind of coalition so that people can rank people second, and creates a different approach to organizing in a way that I find really interesting.
Yeah, the races can get less nasty. Some of the races that we've seen recently, I think, might have sounded different if people were like trying to get this person to vote, put you second. And there's certain alliances. We've seen that even in our more flawed version of this that we had in New York. Okay, well, next question is from NeckPen. I often feel a challenge with being a party of the people where everyone has their say is how fragmented our approaches can be. And often that segmentation shows up after primaries when we look at turnout and engagement in general elections. How do we build a stronger, more unifying culture that helps us win over debate? I believe this difference is the one glaring strength of the Republican Party to where a horrible candidate can still win. And then Julie has a follow up on that, which is, and how do we come together to get the work done after a bruising primary fight?
Yeah, boy, I think there's kind of two pieces of this. One is that there is something great in the Democratic Party about the fact that lots of people disagree with each other. If you look at national polls, this is a very high level, and I argue pretty strongly against just thinking about a left-right spectrum in the book. I think there's a lot of other axes to politics that often matter more, including like how much do you think about politics, which really affects whether someone's persuadable at all. If it's not at the center of your life, then you might be open to very different things. If you're squarely in one camp or another, you view it differently. But having said that, nationally, broadly speaking, like something like 35 to 40% of the country identifies as conservative, 35 to 40 identifies as moderate, and 20 to 30 identifies as liberal, if you just give people those three options. And that means that Republicans can be competitive in a general election and a competitive environment by getting all the conservatives and then a small fraction of moderates to come over their way. And Democrats in Wisconsin, lots of other places have to win with just about every liberal or progressive or leftist person and the majority, significant majority of the kind of moderates or independents. And that means that people are going to disagree about stuff. Now, to blow up the left-right spectrum, in general, people have, especially persuadable voters, swing voters, non-voters, have some views that are conservative and some that are really left, and some views that are like, don't have much support in either party. And the question of like, is this an election about healthcare? If yes, Democrats are going to win, or is this an election that's, about fear of some other? And if yes, probably conservatives are going to win. Like, there's a lot about what is the central issue that's at stake in an election, that is, not just about people's kind of checklist of which issues they support. But the Democratic Party, to be nationally competitive in a country that is as huge and diverse and as ideologically diverse as the United States of America, it requires a coalition of people who disagree with each other. And it means that it has to be a place where people can hash out their differences in a primary and then find a way to unite in the general. The kind of structure of the American electorate and public opinion means that you have to be able to find a way to find common cause with people who you disagree with on often some pretty significant stuff. And if you can do that, then you can win. And in fact, some of the core ideas that the vast majority of Democrats support are also supported by the vast majority of Americans in general. Like the basic idea that the economy should work for everyone is something that is genuinely uniting for Democrats, and something that Republicans, every time they have power, try to smash to pieces. There's constantly tax cuts for the ultra rich and program cuts for the kind of poor and middle class in this country when the Republicans take power. Um, there's a ton of ways to find that kind of common ground, and to find ways to negotiate and find something that works for everyone on issues where people disagree. So it's just much harder, I think, to be in a coalition party that way. And building coalitions across lines of difference always involves the kind of, challenge and messiness and sometimes really intense feelings. And yet also, I think it is small d democracy within the Democratic Party that those conversations happen within this broader context of finding a way to win and then actually deliver for people. So this is not to say I don't have a magic solution for this, other than to say I don't think we should expect that to change at all. Or I don't think we should expect that to change. I think we should we should embrace that as just part of the big challenge, and drawing a circle big enough that everyone can see themselves in it and be able to find a way to show up even with people that they find to be uncomfortable in that circle with them, is part of I think living in a small d democratic party within a democracy, that even though Republicans did win the last national election, the fact that they didn't figure out a way to do that and then have come into office and are just trying to systematically ravage any government program or benefit that's intended for someone who doesn't think, look, talk, vote like Donald Trump himself, uh, and that they're losing popularity with this incredible rapidity, I think speaks to the bankruptcy of the GOP's approach. Like, we're not going to become a one size fits all party on the Democratic side, nor should we. And I think that the country deserves something bigger than that.
This is a question from an anonymous participant, and this will be my last question, so I'll pass it to Jess after this. Uh, so I'll probably disappear mid-answer. But do you think the two-party system is inevitable?
Um, I think that Alaska has multi-party coalitions in their state legislature, and that is partly the culture of Alaska, and there's the culture, unique demographics, there's a bunch of different specific things, the geography, but also partly structural questions around the fact that they do have this ranked choice voting system, and the fact that they've adopted a different strategy than specifically Democrats have adopted a strategy of building multi-party coalitions with some Republicans, with independent voters, and that, like, I think that suggests to me that there may be a future where it's different. I think that ultimately the kind of two-party system tends to be driven by structures and incentives, just like so much of how the whole universe works. And in a two-party system, if the other side loses a vote, then that helps my side, and so that just creates this. And if I gain a vote, it hurts the other side, and it creates this uh, thing where both sides are constantly going to try to degrade the other and grow themselves. And I think if we try out some different approaches, if we have proportional representation for House districts, for example, it creates a world where potentially people could register their frustration with a ruling party by doing something other than just voting for a party that might want to destroy democracy itself. Lee Drutman is a political scientist who has a book called Escaping the Two-Party Doom Loop. And I think his argument's pretty persuasive to me, that part of with the Republican Party is bent on, basically destroying representative democracy and building an authoritarian state, having a world where if people are pissed at Dems, the GOP is their only alternative. This GOP is really dangerous for the long-term viability of a small d democratic system. And I think it's worth, especially seeing if we can figure out at the state level, and seeing if we can then practice at the federal level ways that we could expand the overall terrain. And someone notes Nebraska illustrates what this can look like, and there's a number of states where you can see independent candidates that are building kind of multi-party coalitions doing really well. And I think there's something hopeful in that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that's looking to Alaska as an example is something very interesting to consider, because for some of us, especially in red states, it's hard to even imagine what even having a Democratic majority could look like, much less a coalition government. So thanks for that. This is kind of an interesting follow-up question, because we just spoke a little bit about moving beyond the two-party system. And I think I would caution that at Arena, we're very emphatic that we shouldn't be doing things just because the Republicans are doing them. Sometimes that's an argument not to do those things. But there is a question from Aaron, if there's anything you think that Republicans are doing that we aren't, but that we should be.
Yeah. Well, I first totally agree with you that we shouldn't always just copy what the GOP does. I will also say very often you find out that the GOP is doing something because they observe the Democrats doing it.
Yeah.
And there's the internal conversation in both parties is often like, we don't win because we don't have our act together the way the other side does. That said, I do think that something that the GOP has done and by GOP, I mean the amorphous blob. I think it's worth saying that the Republican Party formally is, uh, in many places, a shell even worse
Right.
than the Democratic, formal Democratic Party is. It is essentially the political arm of Donald Trump himself at this point, and is not investing in local elections in the way that, a lot of state Democratic parties are. But the Republican amorphous blob has several big year-round relational voter operations and year-round communications operations that I think there's really something to learn from, and a huge investment in leadership training. And this is something, Arena is obviously part of building beautifully on the kind of democratic side of the equation. But if you look at the Leadership Institute on the right, they are decades old and have like 10 times the budget of all the Democratic leadership organizations combined. If you look at the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Ralph Reed's big Project Post-Christian Coalition, they have this massive, I think they claim like 40 million people that are involved in one way or another in a year-round relational program that doesn't close up shop after every election cycle. And that it takes a lot of money and a lot of time. It takes leadership and organization and a plan, but you can see that in action on the right in ways that I think should be inspiring to people on our side, both in wanting to counteract and fight back against them, but also just in terms of the scale and ambition of what the right has created in multiple levels. There's I think there's some things that Democrats and progressives have done that the right is freaking out about and trying to replicate as well, and we shouldn't sell ourselves short. And I think we have a lot more interesting, charismatic candidates and communicators than they do, have more crossover appeal than they do, and it comes from having a system where you don't just need Donald Trump's personal approval to be able to build your own success. Like there's a lot to be said for our side. We shouldn't have envy about everything about the right, but I think that the kind of enduring focus on building big, dense, relationally thick networks and supporting future talent for the long term is something that we can learn from the right, and hopefully over time we can lap them on so that they're talking about this in their version of this call.
Yeah, appreciate that. And I mean, obviously at Arena, we completely agree. I think leadership development, talent development, shout out to everyone on this call, investing in the staff and the people who are going to be leading us through not just the next cycle, but the next cycles ahead. We really, really, truly believe in. And one thing that we think about in terms of leadership development, in addition to formal training, et cetera, is how the community can be a network of mentors to each other. And I think, as you know, our audience is mostly campaign staffers here. So Ben, I think our last question for you for the day is if there is one piece of advice that you wish that you had heard earlier in your career, or if there's something that when you were earlier in your career would have helped you to hear, you have the stage. Tell us.
So I got kind of 4 different pieces of advice that I think actually are kind of the same. So I'm gonna say them I'm gonna say each of them, and you'll be able to detect the through line. The first shortest version was be good at something. That was the that was the advice from a mentor when I was in college. The second is do something that you're good at, that you enjoy doing, that you think is important. The intersection of those 3 things is where your career is gonna thrive. And I found that to be incredibly helpful as I thought about different options in moments when I've had the kind of forking branch of career choices and life directions. The third is a kind of inversion of this. I learned at a leadership training program. It was your weaknesses will never be your strengths. And the kind of takeaway there is find the job in which your strengths are the thing that really matters, the thing that will propel you up. It's like be good at something. There's something that is your strong suit, and if you find something where that is the biggest factor in your success, there are other people who are good at the things you're not good at. Like find something where your weaknesses don't are not blockers, but where your strengths are what allow you to soar. And all of those are summed up in the best advice. My favorite thing that a friend shared with me is a quote by Howard Thurman, who's a civil rights leader and preacher, who said, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because the world needs people to come alive." And I just love that quote. And to me, it sums up all the other stuff because it's at its heart, you are going to thrive and do your best work when you find the thing that brings your full self out that makes you excited to jump out of bed in the morning, that allows you to sustain it because you enjoy it, you can see why it matters, you're good at it. That's the thing you're looking for. And until you find that thing, keep trying different things. Like, it is okay to have lots of things not work out. You only need to find one thing that really floats your boat, because when you find that, then your boat will float. Like, that is the big goal in the early part of your career, is to find that thing that brings you to life. And then for the rest of your career, it's to find ways to make that strength compound and grow and become the central thing that lifts up your career. And I believe in my heart that everybody on this call and all of us who are doing this work can find that thing in their career, in their life, that's going to open the path to making the biggest difference you can.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We couldn't agree with you more. It's so great to kind of hear your perspective on the work. And we're very appreciative to you, Ben, for spending your time with us. We are going to wrap up. If you haven't already guessed, Ben Wikler is the author of This Is the Plan. It's a good book. It's very entertaining. It references some other works of fiction that are also on my top fave 5 list, including, as you may have heard, The Princess Bride. Thank you so much. Let's give it up in the chat for Ben. We have dropped in the chat also links to purchase this book if you'd like to have it for yourself and read it. And that is our show. Ben, anything else that you would like to say to the team?
That's good for me, and I love the links not only to the book but to the Arena Toolbox and to the documentary about the work in 2020 and so much more. Thank you, Jess. Thank you to everyone in this community. Thanks for all that you're doing now, all that you're going to do, and don't forget Wisconsin this fall. We have a shot at a trifecta. We need everybody's help.
We're excited. Awesome. Thank you so much. That is our show, and hopefully the end of the recording.